Hello everyone, welcome to another video. This is part 11 of my Gateway API for Kubernetes series, and today I want to show you how we can implement monitoring. Since I'm using AKS, I'm using built-in features for the monitoring. This means we are going to deploy a managed Grafana, also managed Prometheus, and we are going to use the log analytics workspace we have in Azure. But since Grafana and Prometheus are open source, it would also work almost the same way with any Kubernetes cluster. So the plan for today is, first I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to implement today. So we have the application gateway for containers on one side and also the Kubernetes cluster on the other side. Then we take a look at AKS and Prometheus, then Grafana, and in the end I'm going to show you a demo, mostly in the Azure portal, how you can set up everything. As always, if you're interested in the slides and the demo, you can scan the QR code or you will find the link in the description down below. So the plan for today is, here we have different metrics, logs, and general health information about our resources. The first one we're going to install or deploy are diagnostic logs for the application gateway for containers. There we're going to create a new log analytics workspace, and then we'll configure the application gateway to send all the diagnostic information to this log analytics workspace. After this, we are also going to deploy the monitoring for AKS. This means we are going to create a Prometheus instance as well as Grafana, and we're using the same log analytics workspace for all our Kubernetes data. This means afterwards we can use either Prometheus or Grafana. Today I'm going to show you some samples in Grafana, how we can display our informations and how you can create some useful dashboards. I'll also show you something odd about the application gateway. I've created and deleted the application gateway a couple times when I was preparing for this video, and today we're going to see that it is already configured for resources that don't even exist. So once you switch to the Azure portal, you will see what I mean. But first, a quick introduction at the options we have. So for the application gateway for containers, we can use the Azure monitoring features. This means we can have metrics. For metrics, we can have information like the amount of total requests, the HTTP status code, so everything we want to see if our application is healthy and what is going on with our application. Next up, we can also have diagnostic logs. So again, we can see what is going on. And with this information, we can also create alerts. This is just built-in Azure functionality. So for example, we can configure alerts if we have HTTP 500 error, then we send an email to a group of our administrators. Lastly, we can visualize all of this information in Grafana. We just use the log analytics workspace as our data source, and then we can build the dashboards in Grafana. After we've set this up, we're going to set up AKS and Prometheus. And here we can use the managed Prometheus instance from Azure. This means it's basically a button click. Azure will take care of almost everything and install it. And then we have to apply one configuration. In this configuration, we only have to change one line of code. That's the namespace we have deployed our gateway in. And if you follow this demo, then you don't have to change anything and just apply the file. Once the file is applied, then Prometheus knows how to scrape our data from the AKS cluster and will collect them in Prometheus itself. And we can use Grafana afterwards to display this data. Also, since our gateway and the application load balancer, so everything related to the gateway is running inside of AKS, we can also scrape these informations and then also display Grafana. And I'm not an expert at all with Grafana, so I'm just going to show you very basic dashboards today. But I think it's more interesting for you to see how we can set it up, the permissions we need, and then you can build your dashboards yourself. For Grafana, we are going to create a managed Grafana instance. This means Azure takes care of creating it, and also it configures the authorization. This means I have to log in with my user before I can access Grafana. If you just copy paste the link to the Grafana, you won't be able to access it because your user doesn't have access. Additionally, you also have to configure the permissions. By default, it's a little bit odd, but Grafana doesn't have access to the Log Analytics workspace. Therefore, Grafana can't display any data. This means we're going to have to set this up, and I'm going to show you how and what permissions we have to set for Grafana. After this, we can create some custom dashboards. So I'm going to show you today the total amount of endpoints. So I think we have 2 demo applications running right now. So we'll see that we are going to have 2 endpoints. Then we can also add even more information. For example, the latency of the backend, HTTP status codes, and so on. Like, it's almost limitless the options we have. And with this, let's switch over to the terminal first. Let's create our Log Analytics workspace, and then we switch over to the Azure portal and configure everything. All right, here in the terminal, let's first define 2 variables. It's not really necessary today, but I just like to have the variables in one place. And if I want to change something in the future, it's easier to change them. So here we only have the name of the resource group and the name for the Log Analytics workspace we are going to create in the next step. With this information, we can use the AC monitor Log Analytics workspace create command. We provide the resource group and we provide the name of the Log Analytics workspace we want to create. So this is going to take maybe around a minute. And while this is running, let's switch over to the Azure portal and I can show you how we can configure the Azure Application Gateway for containers first. Here in the Azure portal, we have the 2 resource groups we have created over this video series. The first one is the App Gateway Container Resource Group. If we open this, we can see we have here our Kubernetes service, the Log Analytics workspace that's currently being deployed, and the Azure ALB Managed Identity, as well as the Managed Identity for the Cert Manager. In the second resource group, we have everything that belongs to our AKS cluster, like the IP address, the load balancer, the virtual machine skill set, as well as our application gateway for container. If you open this, we have seen in one of the first videos, there's not much we can configure. We have something like the front end, where we can see our gateway. We have the association, where we have the link to our VNet. If you scroll down a bit, we have here this monitoring section, which is almost the same for each service, because that's the Azure monitoring features we have. So if you take this last one, the diagnostic settings, then you can see here, there's already something configured, but I have not configured anything outside of the videos. So this is something I have tested out before I started my video series. So even though I have deleted the application gateway, the configuration is still around. And maybe you've seen one of the first videos where I also said that this front end has the full qualified domain name. This one here, this one also stays always the same. Even if I delete the application gateway and then recreate it a couple days later, I get the same full qualified domain name. It's not a big problem for me because I don't have to pay for it. It's just a bit of an odd behavior, and it shows that it's not fully deleted in the background. But anyways, if we go now to the diagnostic settings, and here we have the App Gateway log. So that's the Log Analytics workspace we have just created. If you click on it, we can see we have now the connection. It's still working, even though it has been configured before. And I think this could lead to some unwanted behavior if you don't think about this. But once you know it, it should be fine. And also usually we don't delete and recreate the application gateway too many times. So this means here we have our Log Analytics workspace. It's running. So everything is good. This means we can close this. And now let's take a look at the settings, what I've configured before. Here you can see for the logs, I collect all the logs that there are. For the matrix, I also collect all metric information, and then I send it to the Log Analytics workspace. So this is in my subscription and with the name we have created before. This means we already have everything set up. We send our information already to the Log Analytics workspace, and now we can display them. So if we close this window, then we have here the alerts. I'm not going to create one today, but this is just like Azure functionality where you can easily create alert rules. Today I want to take a look at the metric information. So here this has already the application gateway pre-selected, and now we can configure what metric we want to display. Interesting is the total amount of requests our application gateway handled. So if we search for total requests, then we can select if we want the sum, or actually in this case, we can only select the sum. This means we already have here some information. This means a couple hours ago, there were around 4,000 requests. Then here we also have around 4,000 and then nothing. And a couple of minutes ago, it increased again. This also shows that it logs the requests from back in the past before we even activated the Log Analytics workspace. This proves that the metric information is already there, and you can also use these metrics without saving them anywhere. Even though this is very basic, it gives us some information. For example, we can see we had this big spike here in the morning and the big spike at around 9 o'clock, I would say. But it doesn't tell us much else. So what we can do now is we can apply some splitting. So this means we take the resource or the type of metric we wanted before, the total request, and split it up. So we click on this apply splitting. Here we can only select the front end because the requests are sent to the front end. And then you can also say how you want to sort it. What we can see here is we have a lot of requests to the front end on the port 80. This means HTTP. And not that many, like even around 10% to HTTPS. This means for HTTPS, it's always quite evenly, except before starting the recording, it went up by a bit. But overall, HTTP was by far the biggest number of requests. To show maybe a bit more information, I can filter for the last 30 minutes. So you can see that the number of HTTP and HTTPS requests is around the same all the time. So we have a constant flow of requests. This can be useful to see what's going on with your applications. What is the traffic pattern? For example, if you have an online shop and you send out a newsletter, you want to see that the traffic increases. And it also can help you deciding how much scaling you want to have or how many resources you want to have before you scale. Another filter I want to show you, or metric, is if I delete this one. And this is the HTTP response status. So now I want to see, is everything okay with my application? Do I get error messages? What is going on? So as before, I just can see a total. This means I have around 5,400 requests, or in this case, HTTP response status codes, but I don't see any information what they actually are. So I again have to apply some filtering, some splitting. Here I can split based on the HTTP response code. And here I can see that almost all of them, this means 5,370, were with the HTTP status code 200. So everything okay. But there were also 19 with the error code, with HTTP code for 400. This means something was wrong, but it was on the client side. We can also see if we click on this, if we click on the others to make them disappear, then we can click on the one we want to highlight. And here we can see it was every now and then like one or two, but then after around 4 o'clock, there was a little bit of spike, like it's 12 requests. It's basically nothing, but this could be an indication that something went wrong back at this time. As you can see, with the matrix of the application gateway for containers, you can get some basic information. It can also help you to see what is going on. But I think it's way more interesting to see what is happening inside the Kubernetes cluster, because almost everything, and also especially our applications, are running inside the AKS cluster. So now let's switch over to our AKS service and enable the monitoring there. So I can close this. I go back to the resource groups. Here inside this resource group, I have our Kubernetes service. If I click on this, then I can scroll down on the left side, almost all the way down until the monitoring section. If you click here on Insights, then it will already ask you if you want to enable the monitoring. Actually, it already redirects you automatically to the monitoring section. Now I can click on Monitor Settings, and here you can enable whatever you want. So I enable Prometheus, I also enable Grafana. Then for the container logs, I want to enable this, and it says that it's using the log analytics workspace that already exists. That's the one we have created before. If you don't have one yet, then it would create a new one. Also, as we can see here for the Azure Monitor workspace, it creates one with this quite ugly name, default Azure Monitor workspace. So in a production environment, it would make sense to create it first and then just reference it. All the way down on the advanced settings, we can see exactly this. So here either you can create a new one or you can just use the default one. The same for Grafana. For now, the default one is good enough. We just want to see how it works. Here we have our log analytics workspace, the one we've created before. And here we have the log configuration. So we collect almost everything, and we collect it every minute. This is something you have to reconsider, because the more data you collect, the more expensive it gets. And logging and monitoring in Azure can get expensive quite quickly, especially if you don't set a limit. But for the demo today, just the default values are good enough. Now I can click on Configure, and this will start the deployment. So this means Azure now creates the managed Prometheus, the managed Grafana, and also all the data collection rules. This is a whole bunch of resources, and it will take around, I think, 10 minutes. So for now, I'm going to stop the video, and once the deployment is finished, we'll come back and then we can configure our Prometheus and Grafana. The deployment is finished, and if you open the deployment details, you can see how many resources have been created. Therefore, it takes around 10 minutes. Before you can use Prometheus, we have to configure it. The way Prometheus works, it scrapes information from a target, in this case our AKS cluster, and we have to provide a config file. So let's switch over to terminal, let's apply this config file, and then I'll show you how the file looks like. Here in the terminal, we have the remains of our deployment, so we can clean this up. Then we do a basic kubectl apply -f with the file name. This should only take a couple seconds, and the Prometheus configuration has been applied. To be more precise, it is the configuration for the Azure monitoring agent. That's the agent that monitors our AKS cluster. Now let's switch over to Visual Studio Code, and let's take a look at this config file. Here you can see the file we just applied. It is a config map, and it configures the Azure monitoring agent, what and how to scrape the data. For example, here you can see that by default, it scrapes the information from the kubelet namespace, but not from the core DNS namespace. And with this config file, you can easily update the settings. I haven't changed anything except one line. If we scroll a bit further down, we have here this pod annotation. And here we have to change the name to the name where we have deployed our application load balancer. In my case, it was the ALB-infra namespace. So if you followed the demo series in these videos, then your name will be the same. If you have a different name, you have to update this. Then you can save the file and apply it. Now we wait a little bit for Prometheus to scrape all the data. Then we switch over to the Azure portal and we take a look at the permissions for Grafana. Once they are set, we open Grafana and create some dashboards. Back in the Azure portal, the one last step we have to take before we can use Grafana is we have to give it permissions to our application gateway for a container, as well as to the log analytics workspace. In a real-world project, you would give the permission on these two resources, but for today, I want to keep it as simple as possible, so I set the permission on the subscription. So I open the subscription here. Also, I think, or I hope that it's always in a real-world project, you would also use infrastructure as code and not click around in the Azure portal. But for today, for the demo, the portal is good enough. So I click here on Add Role Assignment. Once this opens, we can select the role we want. In our case, we want to use the monitoring reader role. This is a role that has read access to all the monitoring data. So it doesn't matter if it's in the application gateway for a container or in the log analytics workspace. Then we want to assign to a managed identity. Here you can select the members. In the subscription, we can see I have only 3 managed identities. And here you can select the Azure Managed Grafana. Here we only have one. That's the one we select. That's the managed identity from the Grafana instance we have just created. We click on Next. Then I haven't selected the role. You actually have to click on it. Now we can assign it. This might take a couple minutes until the permissions are propagated. So I'm going to stop the video here. I am going to wait 5 minutes and then we continue with setting up our first dashboard in Grafana. So I waited a couple minutes. Now we can go to our Grafana. So I just search on top for Azure Managed Grafana. Here you can see we have the one we have created before. If you open this one, we can see here the URL, the endpoint. Then you can see I have to log in with my user. Then I also have to provide the 2-factor. Once I've done this, I should see the dashboard. Now we should see our Grafana dashboard. On the top, you can see this plus sign and here you can create a new dashboard. Then we click on the plus add visualization. Here you can select the data source. You can either use Azure Monitor, which has the log analytics workspace behind, or I can use Prometheus. So for now, for the first one, let's select Prometheus. Now I can configure the query to get the data, and then this data will be visualized in Grafana. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see here the metric. We can select whatever we want to search for. For now, I'm going to search for the ALB controller because I want to show you something about the gateway, the application gateway for containers. So in this case, it's called ALB controller underscore total requests, total endpoints. Then I select this one, I run the query, and I can already see some data, but it's not very useful. And here comes in the Grafana know-how you have. As I said, I'm just more or less a beginner with Grafana. So what I know is I can change the visualization on top. So for this type, I use a gauge. Here you can see I have 5 endpoints. Before I said I have 2, but I forgot that over the time we deployed more and more endpoints. But it's not very useful, this information. Like the name is underscore name, something ALB controller. So this is something we have to make nicer. The one thing I know about Grafana and this query is if we scroll down, we can open this options section here, and under legend we can configure it. So if we select custom, then we can provide how we want to name these resources. For us, we use service underscore name because we are displaying this name of the services of our applications. Now we can see we have the name of our endpoints. It's still not the prettiest, but I'm also quite zoomed in. But at least we can see we have some information. So if we follow this demo series, we have here the Nginx, then we have the routing demo. Actually, I think we have two routing demos. Then we have the traffic one and the one for our wildcards. Here on the right side, we have even more information, so you can just play around with everything we have here. For example, if we select a bar chart, we can see the outcome is not very useful, but it's very easy to just like click around and then you can see what is happening. So this is a little bit better. It gives us more information, but dashboards, I think, is something you get started with some information and then you improve it over time. Speaking of improving, let's leave it as it is for now and let's go over to the next dashboard. So I'm going to discard this. Now we click again on the new dashboard. This opens this page again. We click on Add Visualization, but this time we select Azure Monitor as our data source. After we have selected Azure Monitor as our data source, then we can select what service we want to use of Azure Monitor. By default, it's the matrix, but for now I want the logs. Then I select the resource. In this case, I'm looking for the Log Analytics workspace again. And then I paste my query. So in this case, I select the cube pod inventory table. There I select all the pods that are older than 5 minutes and that are running. Then I summarize them by the amount of pods per namespace, and I order it by the namespace with the highest amount of pods. If you take a look further down, the format I leave as logs, but then you can see we don't have any data showing right now. This is because on the top or on the top right, we have selected time series, and this is no time series data. We only have the namespaces and the number of pods. So if we select something different here, for example, bar chart, then we can see now we have our namespaces and how many pods are running in this namespace. As you can see, the vast majority runs in the kube system, so that's Kubernetes internal software usually. Then we have our application load balancer, our routing demo, the cert manager. So here you can see all the namespaces where we have created pods and applications before. As we have seen, we can use KQL, the custom query language, to query the data in the Log Analytics workspace, and with Grafana we can create nice dashboards. For now, let's leave the logs as they are. Let's refresh the page and let's create a new dashboard, but this time for matrix. So I click again on Add Visualization. As my data source, I use Azure Monitor again, but this time I use matrix. Then for the source, you can again select whatever resource you want. But for this demo, I'm using the Azure Application Gateway for a container. So that's the one we've created in the second video of the series. I select this one. Then we can see it sets already the namespace to traffic controllers. And here we can select what resource or what metric we want to show. So I select the HTTP response status. Then everything else we leave as it is. And you can see here we have HTTP responses, but you can't really tell what they're saying, except what you can see is that around 1930 they went down. So here we had around 130, and before we had 190 and peaking to almost 300. But then we can add some dimensions depending on what we're using. For example, in the example before, we used the traffic, the splitting in the Azure portal, and then we could select what HTTP code or range of codes we wanted. We can do the same here, so you can add a dimension. I'm not sure, maybe somebody of you knows this, but first I have to leave this as it is, and then I have to select a second dimension, and here I can select the HTTP response code, and then I can select whatever response code I want. For example, I only want the error ones, so this would be 400 and 500. Then you can see I have here the yellow one is the 500 one, so they're always very low, and with the green one, that's the 400 one, I have at around 1645-ish, I have 104, so something happened at this time. But what I don't like is the naming here. I can figure out what it means, but it's very hard to read. So we can format the legend again. And here we're going to use the HTTP response status. And then we tell it how we want to format it. In this case, I want to use the HTTP response code. Then I close the brackets. If you wait a second, now it's nicer to read. So you can see we have HTTP 400 and 500 error. Again, as I said before, if you know Grafana, you can create so much better dashboards than what I'm showing you today. I only want to show you or introduce you to the different options we have. So we have seen we can query data from Prometheus, from the matrix, from the logs, in this case from the application gateway for container, and all of these resources can give us useful information. This is everything I wanted to show you today. So we have seen that we can use the Azure built-in functionality, for example, for the application gateway. There we can use matrix, we can create simple dashboards, and we have an overview of what is going on. But if you want to have more information and create nicer dashboards, then we activated Prometheus and Grafana on our Kubernetes cluster. And this allows us to scrape the data from the Kubernetes cluster and then visualize them in Grafana. Additionally, we can use data from the log analytics workspace, from Prometheus, or if you have any other resources, you can use them as well, and then create nice dashboards in Grafana. Then I've also shown you that you have to give the monitoring reader rule to Grafana, otherwise it is not able to read the data we have stored. Unfortunately, this is not in the official documentation, so if you follow the documentation, you will have to do some Googling yourself to figure out why the docu is not working as it says. But for now, this is everything. I hope this was interesting for you and it helps you to get started with visualization, having an overview of your logs, your matrix. And with this, I hope to see you next week with another video.